Hello, everyone. My name is Priyanka Raha. I am the VP of Networking and Events for the Women in Business Association, or WIB, at the Kelly Direct MBA. Our WIB group promotes women to further their careers as leaders in the business world and beyond. Today, we are going to discuss about maternal bias and the stigma associated with it. Motherhood is a life changing event and is an absolutely amazing experience. It also comes with a lot of responsibilities. Being a new mother, I can totally vouch for it. But as a professional, is it fair to be penalized for motherhood? The motherhood penalty is a career problem that most women face after having a child. Motherhood often triggers false assumptions at workplace that women are less committed to their careers or even less competent. It affects their wages, their ability to get hired, their performance evaluations, promotions, and the list goes on. Today, we are very grateful to have Rachel Bauer with us, who is going to discuss this issue. She will let us know how to deal with maternity bias and how mothers can best prepare themselves before, during, and after their maternity leaves. A brief background about Rachel. Rachel is the co founder of Guilt Collective. It's an organization that changes individual views and behaviors to shift workplace cultures and break down gender barriers. Rachel is extremely passionate about elevating and advancing women on their paths to success through leadership workshops and trainings. So, without further ado, let's hear about maternal bias from Rachel. Hey, Rachel, welcome to our
Hi.
web platform. We are
Yes,
so
thank
excited
you.
to have you today.
I'm so excited to be here. And I feel like I should say, in the true spirit of working moms, we've had to reschedule this, it feels like 100 times because of childcare issues. And I'm so glad that it's happening.
Me
And I'm
too.
so glad to be here. I'm really excited to be asked to be a part of this.
Great. If you want to talk a little bit about yourself or share your background.
Yeah. So yes, I'm the co-founder of Guild Collective. We started the business 8 years ago, almost to the day. And what's important, I think, as we talk about maternal bias, first of all, I think everyone should care about maternal bias, but I am also not naive. And I know that working moms care about it the most, right? And I became a working mom 5.5 years ago. I have 3 kids that I care for in my home. And I also run a business that, takes up quite a lot of my time. My partner works full time as well. So, the experiences of moms in the workplace, I have an interesting perspective being that I work with all different types of companies, big and small. Some companies that don't even have a maternity leave policy when they start working with us, and some companies that have had maternity leave policies in place for 50 years. And so we have really kind of seen what that looks like at all different levels, and also how it impacts employees at all different levels. And I say employees because I mean female employees that have children, and also all of the other people that they work with, because hopefully today, I help everyone to recognize that maternity leave policies and maternal bias impacts everyone. But yeah, really excited to be here and to be a part of this important discussion with you.
Yeah, great, great. So, can you please tell us more? What exactly is this maternity bias?
Yeah. So you explained it perfectly. That idea of, once a woman has a child, we incorrectly assume that she's going to be less committed to her career. And we also incorrectly assume that she's less competent than she once was. We as a society, I think, although we undervalue it, probably 1,000 times over, we undervalue it. We are aware that being a mom is a hard job, right? Um, what we haven't as a society done is start to really build systems that, help us to realize that being a working mom is a hard job, but also so is being a working dad. And so what we've really seen with that is that working moms, they collect more of that stigma because we make an assumption essentially that they are now dedicated towards their kids. They're no longer as dedicated to their career and the fulfillment that they once had there. Maternal bias is the most documented and highest prevailing form of workplace gender bias. And I think, and research shows that that's because, at the same time that we are combating that maternal bias, we're also still, as women and women identifying people, we're also still fighting all of the other forms of workplace bias. And it's kind of interconnecting and overlapping, and it's compounding. It's not just, what 2 + 2 makes 4. It's kind of, all of these different types of bias interconnecting and overlapping sort of creates a whole that's bigger than the sum of its parts. So it's complex, but it really kind of boils down to that one point about, we just, as soon as someone becomes a mom, and, I would even argue if someone has a child biologically, so they carry a child, especially in an in-person workplace, but relevant on a remote or hybrid one as well, when they start to show, when they start to make their plans for leave. If you don't have proper systems in place in your workplace, it's very easy to start that assumption that they are checking out before they have even left for leave.
Yeah. So that is not definitely not ideal for sure.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Far from
And
ideal, actually.
yeah. Well, and one thing that I do want to say about maternal bias as well, this is really important to me, something I'm personally really passionate about, is that with any form of bias, we often talk about it in the way that it impacts us externally, right? So, this person has a bias, my or organization doesn't have systems that mitigate biases or whatever. With maternal bias, it's really important, I think, that we talk about how we internalize it as well. And I can really speak to this. When I became pregnant with my first child, I very quickly started to feel a decrease in confidence that I was going to be able to be as dedicated to my career. I very quickly started to question myself and what I was going to be capable of. And as I dug deeper into this work and did more of this work, I realized that that experience is relatively universal. Most moms I talked to said that they felt that lack of confidence, that imposter syndrome as well. And what's interesting is that I also started to ask the question, of what types of questions did your colleagues, friends, your parents, aunts, uncles, what kind of questions do they ask you as you prepare to have your first child, or even your second or third? This could happen with your later children as well. The questions I was getting, and the questions I found that other moms were getting from well-meaning people, is, are you going to go back to work? What are you going to do for childcare? How are you going to handle that? Me as a business owner, do you think you're going to have to cut back on your business? I then asked myself, what kind of questions if you're in a heterosexual relationship, what kind of questions is your male partner getting asked as they prepare to have kids? Almost nothing. Almost nothing. And, for myself and for the people that I've talked to about this and what research supports is, those questions, they matter, and they build into that internalized bias as well. So we're fighting it from the outside, but I also would call individuals to look inward as well and realize, am I having that bias against myself as well?
That's a really good point. Like introspection it's extremely important, especially during this time. So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. So the workplaces who offer maternity leave. So for those employees, how they can best prepare themselves for their leaves.
Yeah. This is a good question. And I think it's a question that, there's sort of the official answer, and then there's also the unofficial answer, right? So first and foremost, you want to go through the proper channels of understanding what is the leave allotted, what are the structures that you need to navigate in order to take that leave. So if your company, for example, requires that you do some portion of FMLA, understanding all of the paperwork and nuances that goes with it. Different people in different states. I have a really good friend who navigated this in Washington State. They have some additional benefits through their state government, and she had to do a ton of different paperwork and everything to make sure she was prepared. So that's the, above the book answer. My more intentional answer is, this is the time where navigating and understanding the sort of office politics is really important. If you are not aware yet of what the sort of unspoken culture of maternity leave is in your organization, as soon as you learn that you're going on that journey, hopefully before you even begin the process of having a child, you need to begin asking questions and fact finding about what that really looks like. So that's having intentional discussions with management, that's having intentional discussions with colleagues about what is the culture of preparation for that leave, and kind of reading between the lines here is important as well. So I can kind of explain what I mean by that. I'll step back just a couple of beats. As you're having discussions about, what is the process for someone who's preparing to go on leave, you can begin to understand whether or not processes exist at all. And you can begin to understand, okay, what do I need to advocate for, which we'll get to later. You'll find out if there is an off-ramp process. So if you're in a business or organization where you have any external clients, any external stakeholders that you work with, what is the process for making sure that those people have someone else to go to when you're not going to be in the office or working? You can kind of really begin to see, are we a culture that we're working in, that, there's a really good process for making sure that you're not working from your delivery room, which I've had many people do or I've known many people that do to try to close the loop and hand off clients. You can kind of learn that in these discussions. The other thing that I think in terms of reading between the lines that, quite frankly, I would even recommend, not even reading between the lines, but really on trying to understand in a more overt way here is, how are we treating leave for mothers versus fathers? So many companies now are moving to parental leave, where they have an expectation, or where they have a policy rather, that is equal time off for expecting mothers and expecting fathers, or also equal time off for many of the different ways we become parents, foster care, adoption, all of that, which is great on paper. But when you start to ask these questions and dig in about your culture, what you can start to ask is, how common is it for someone to take the full allotted time of leave? How common is it for someone to come back early? Then you can even dig further. And what I'm willing to bet many people would find out is that at many places that have that parental leave, men take less of it than they're offered, or they take it in different chunks of time, which as a mom who's returned to the workplace, I've utilized myself, and that can be really beneficial. But it's important to kind of get the cultural understanding of that, because that will sort of tell you a lot about where your company is in terms of their readiness to support you off and on ramping. And it will help you to figure out what it is that you need to advocate for. But really the best thing that you can do when you know that this is, going to be a part of your working life going forward, is to start those conversations early. And in doing that, you're going to be able to identify who are the stakeholders within the company that can help me to navigate my ramp down when I'm preparing for and going on leave, and then my ramp back up when I'm returning to the office. Yeah, I could keep talking about that for a while, but I think it's really important to just kind of get those conversations going as early as you can.
No, that's really great. So
Yeah.
you mentioned a really important aspect of ramping down and ramping up time. So what it should look like and how the employees or moms should advocate for it.
Yes.
Actually, both moms and fathers.
Well, right. And what we're realizing is, before going into all of the different ways that you can look at this and how to advocate for it, is it's really important that we are advocating that all parents who are taking their leave, first of all, research shows that companies who encourage both genders to take the full amount of leave, that is beneficial for everyone, right? Because we don't have an expectation that women should be home longer than men. That can have a negative impact on both women and men when it comes to their careers, navigating that expectation. But when it comes to that ramp down, we want to see that the expectation for all employees taking leave is that they have a ramp down period. I think we do working fathers a really big disservice when we treat their parental leave as like pretend, as fake. I have a really close friend who worked for a very big company and was told by his boss that he was given a certain amount of leave for having his child, and his boss said, well, you want to think about what that actually looks like if you take the full leave, because you're not going to be nursing the baby. It's not really that important of a time for a father to bond with their child. Your wife is probably going to be sick of you staying home. Comments like that, they're so much more common than we realize. And it puts a really stressful pressure on working dads that, the effects, the ramifications of that go into so many different areas, maternal mental health, all of it. So I appreciate what you said about this is for both parents. In terms of ramp down and ramp up time, I will say that this is probably a step that organizations most broadly miss the mark when it comes to leave. And I don't think it's an intentional thing. I think it is because we are all in a culture working in the United States and probably lots of other countries where we are go, go, go. We are, flying by the seat of our pants. We're doing everything we can to get as much done for as long as possible. And we just sometimes skip these steps. So, this is again where I'd say that a lot of companies really miss the mark. It's not impossible. And I would say it's even one of the easier and lower cost ways to provide higher engagement and probably greater retention for your employees would be embedding some of these practices. But really what we use at Guild Collective and what we recommend is, and I think we can list this in the or in the interview description, there are resources available. One of the most, thorough ones that we recommend is biasinterrupters.org. Biasinterrupters.org offers ways to interrupt bias or potential biases in many different workplace systems, but parental leave is specifically on there. What they recommend through their research, this is from the Center for Work-Life Law, is starting this ramp down 3 months prior to someone taking a parental leave. Obviously, with adoption, this can be trickier because you don't always know when that moment's going to happen. But if you are aware, roughly, that I'm going to be welcoming a child in some way, you want to be kind of working backwards 3 months from there. So after you make that pregnancy announcement, typically. And what that's going to look like is creating a plan, working closely with your manager to begin to discuss what leave is going to look like. But B, really making a plan for how to begin distributing your work so that it doesn't just end up on one person's desk, which is typically, again, another thing that happens that can be extremely stressful and create resentment among teams. But, kind of distributing that work, discussing what it's going to look like, even talking through potential scenarios can help to alleviate a lot of anxiety in the birthing parent, because you can discuss, what are we going to do if I have to go on bed rest if you are primarily in-person workforce? Many different things can cause stress for birthing parents. So I think that's important as well. Then you can also plan for that ramp up period when you are planning that ramp down. You can really set the expectation of what to expect. And hopefully this is something that organizations would sort of create as a policy to be applied for all working parents that are returning from leave. But really setting that structure of, we are going to start off with an initial meeting when you first come back. Then we're going to plan, weekly check-ins for the first couple of weeks. Making sure that we are implementing a gradual return to work policy, if we can allow that with our type of work. So are we able to implement starting 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, then 4, then 5, depending on schedules, that's typically best practice. And really, I would say like the gold star standard is assigning and advocating for something called a leave liaison. So someone who can actually, kind of serve as that workplace mentor specific to the very, very nuanced and intense and difficult time of returning to work after having a child. I've seen companies hire external coaches for this, but you can also do something as simple as, pairing up parents who have been back in the workplace for 5 years and helping them to navigate that. I've seen companies offer things like breast milk storage and shipment. There's many different things that companies can do, but as we're preparing for leave, that's when we begin to, sort of set the expectation of what that should look like. In terms of advocacy, it's very, very difficult depending on the situation that you're in to give you a blanket statement. But I think generally those conversations, they kind of shift from fact finding to asking. So you understand the culture because you've been fact finding and looking for, reading between the lines and understanding the expectations. Then you start to ask, I've noticed we don't have an off-ramp process for preparing for parents or anyone going on a leave. People go on leaves for many reasons. Can we set an off-ramp schedule so that I can ensure that my work is going to be, equitably distributed to the different members of our team? And then I can ensure that, we're able to set and meet all performance metrics that are specific to someone who's going on leave. So really advocating not only for the processes, but how you're going to be measured throughout that process as well. And it's having discussions with HR, with your manager. It's kind of being a squeaky wheel a lot of the time, especially if you're at a company that does not have these policies yet.
That's really true. Those are really good tips. I
Yes.
actually have one last burning question. So, is it important to stay current during the leave, even though the expectation is not working during the leave?
Yeah, so I would say, my ideal answer is that no one should be doing any work when they're on their leave in any capacity. But I know that's not the case for a lot of people, a lot of places. This is where, again, going back to that first step of starting to understand the culture early and really getting, as thorough a conversation going with people who have experienced this as you can, and also being extremely candid with your boss. Legally, we cannot require employees to work when they are on leave. But that doesn't mean that employers don't have that expectation. If any, employers or managers are watching this, I hope they are. I would really caution you against having that expectation, because not only is it going to be detrimental to your retention of that employee long term, they're not going to feel supported, but they are also, that can really impact their mental health in a negative way. There are many, many different things that happen when we have children, and many of those can have mental health ramifications if we don't nurture that in an appropriate way. I think it's really important. The best thing that you can do is have a candid discussion with your manager, set those expectations. But more than anything, set your boundaries. It is not, if there is a set policy in place, it's not legal for a company to fire someone because they do not work when they're on their leave. So, that sounds dramatic, but it's really important to know our rights in this situation. But really setting and having those intentional discussions on boundaries is huge. And then this also goes back to, if that that's something that your boss, regardless of discussion, sometimes you can't quite get through. This is when it's really important to sit down with human resources before you go on leave and really get crystal clear on performance metrics for yourself that year. Be extremely intentional of, I want to be sure that if I'm not completing work during my leave, that I am not going to be negatively impacted on my performance evaluation or, my path to growth within this company. So, it's unfortunate that many places, even some of our most progressive companies, the coolest places to work, that we still have to do as much advocacy for this as we do. But I also think, we are as women quite used to having to do the majority of this emotional labor. The more we can get men a part of this discussion and have them be more of advocates for this, a big way to do that is, again, using the leave that they are given. But being really, really intentional, setting those discussions. In a perfect world, our companies would have these discussions for us. Our companies would have these meetings set up, and I knew that was going to happen. The policies are going to be in place before we go on leave, and before we even start working there. But many companies are still getting there, even our more progressive companies. So it's something that we just have to, kind of keep fighting that good fight on. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
No, it's
Cats are crazy. Get down.
just trying to be friendly. That's
Oh
fine.
yeah, no, they just go look out the window. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's better a cat than a toddler, at least when you're having a discussion like this. So I appreciate that we've got childcare managed. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
so glad. Well, thank you so very much,
of
Rachel,
course.
for sharing such valuable suggestions. And these are extremely relevant, not only, of course, for the mothers, but everyone actually for their for their knowledge and understanding as well. So I'm sure this session will help spread awareness and help the mothers to be better prepared to deal with maternity bias at workplace. Thank
Awesome.
you
Thank you
very
so
much for
much.
your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.